Good morning. Greetings and welcome to the Laws Railroad Museum and Historical Site. I'm Jim Saylor of the Owens Valley Railroad Committee, where I serve as Chairman of Research, Education, and Documentation. Today we're going to go over some of the rules, regulations, and parts of Southern Pacific Narrow Gauge Steam Locomotive number 9. Now, for any of you that are interested in ever wanting to learn how a locomotive like this operated, it'd be a good idea to get a hold of some of the old books and manuals. Got an old Southern Pacific Safety Rules manual. Safety is of primary importance when you're around or near a railroad yard, locomotives, and cars. Remember, always think safety first. A couple of books on air brake rules and regulations. Heating, lighting of passenger train cars, maintenance and operation of locomotive headlights. This is a book of rules and regulations while you're operating. Also a good idea, if you can't get the actual booklets themselves, try getting photocopies like this one here, Rules and Regulations for the Handling of Oil-Burning Locomotives. And then this was given to me by a friend of mine in Texas, Joe Dale Morris, Mechanical and Air Brake Examination. Some of the questions and answers that one would have to have and know before they're qualified to become a locomotive engineer or fireman. Let's get started, shall we? A little history about number 9.
A little history about number 9. She was built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, November of 1909. First saw service on the Nevada, California, and Oregon Railroad and came to the Owens Valley in 1928. What was then known on the Southern Pacific as the Mina branch of the narrow gauge. Number 9 is one of the 3 surviving Southern Pacific narrow gauge steam locomotives. Number 8 is up in Sparks, Nevada, number 9 here at Laws, California, and number 18 down at Dahee Park in Independence, California. Of the 3, number 18 is presently under restoration by a group of dedicated volunteers who hope to have it steamed up and ready to go come June of 1999. Number 9 served on the run until October of 1954, when the 8, 9, and 18 were replaced by a General Electric 51-ton diesel locomotive. Number 9 was kept on as the emergency and standby locomotive. In April 1960, just a few days away from abandonment, they wanted to run number 9 one final time under her own power. An inspection was performed. It was found that the flue time had been extended twice, the final extension running out on April 4th of 1960, and as a result number 9 failed her boiler inspection and was unable to make the last run under her own power. So on April 25th, the diesel towed number 9 to Laws, California, shuttled a string of cars from the yards, put it behind it, where number 9 formed the nucleus of what's now the museum. Sadly, in 1960, it would have only cost $11,000 to put number 9 in top running order. Nobody at the time thought that we don't have $11,000, let's get 1,000 people to donate $11 each to get it restored. Now those same 1,000 people would have to pay approximately $275 each, or a total of $275,000 to restore number 9.
Number 9 was classed as a T44 16/20 71 class locomotive. The T stood for 10-wheeler. 10-wheeler means she has 4 pilot wheels, 6 drivers, 0 trailing trucks, known as a 4-6-0 wheel configuration. The 44 of the T44 classification is the diameter of the driving wheels on the side that rides on the rail. Coincidentally, 44 is also the tonnage of this locomotive, 44 tons. 16/20 refers to the cylinders, 16-inch diameter, 20-inch stroke. Now, this is a diagram of the cylinders. You've got number 1, steam chest, top casing. Then you've got the steam chest side casing. 3 is the steam chest itself. 4 is the steam chest cover. Then 5, the steam chest balance plate. 6 are the studs for the steam chest. Number 7 is the steam chest relief valve. Number 8, this is your slide valve. Number 9 up here is your slide valve valance strips. The number 10 is the slide valve exhaust. 11, slide valve yoke. Then 12, slide valve stem sliding box. 13 is the exhaust port. 14 is known as the bridge. 15 are your steam ports. 16 is a feed port. 17 is your cylinder. 18 is the cylinder head front. 19 is the cylinder back. Then 20 is the cylinder head casting or casing front. 21, cylinder head casing back. Surrounding the cylinder is 22, which is the cylinder jacket. 23, these are the cylinder cocks. 24 is the piston. 25 is the piston bowl ring. 26 are the piston packing rings. 27 is the piston follower. 28 is the piston rod. 29 is the piston nut. And 30 is the piston rod stuffing box right here. One was the weight of the locomotive on the drivers, 70,750 pounds. They'd round up to the nearest 1,000 pounds, so they would say it's 71,000 pounds on drivers. The boiler of number 9 stands from the back head inside the cab forward to the back of the smoke box. Then you've got your firebox under the cab. From front to back,
headlight,
have the smokestack, the bell, the sand dome. This is filled with sand. Pipes on the sides go down just in front of the drivers. There's controls in the cab which use air to regulate the flow of sand to the drivers for traction of the locomotive. Now the boiler, as I mentioned before, is a cylindrical tube that has 200 2-inch flues or pipes that run through it horizontally. These flues carry the fire from the firebox, the hot gases, through the flues and out the stack. These are surrounded by water, and above the top row of flues there's approximately 18 inches of space between the flues and the top of the boiler inside, and about 12 to 15 inches of that is space for your steam. Next you have the steam dome. This is placed on steam locomotives for extra storage space of steam. Place for the dry pipe, which is a pipe that admits steam. As you open the throttle, steam goes into the dry pipe, down to the cylinders. Behind this, up against the cab, is a Pyle National E2 type steam generator for supplying electricity to the locomotive's headlight, backup light, and lights that are in the cab. As I mentioned before, the 44 inches is from here on the driver down to where it rides on the rail. Now, notice this section of the driver. This is the driver tire. Yes, they have tires that need to be changed occasionally. If you've ever changed a tire on your car, consider yourself lucky. These are a lot more difficult to change. What you do is run a tube of oxygen and acetylene that's lit, heat the tire off, pound it off, heat the new tire, pound it on, let it cool and shrink on. In boarding a steam locomotive, always face the steps coming on and off. Make sure that you use the handrails, have a firm grip and good footing. Same with getting down off the locomotive steps. If you're in a railroad yard, you want to stay at least 10 feet from the center of the track. Make sure that you have clearance from any passing cars, locomotives. Remember, always think safety. Now, in crossing a track, look both ways. Now, if a car such as this is a static display, you've got another track on the other side, come out, not next to the car or locomotive, but come out about 15 feet out. Notice, don't step on the rail, but step over the rail. Sometimes you can slip and you can fall, hurt yourself. That's why it's wise, don't ever step on rail, switches, or those parts. Always step over. No fooling around either. On a static display such as this, notice they've got wire mesh over the steps. That is because, for your safety, you're not to be climbing up on the running boards of the locomotive, up on top of the boiler. Provision's been made where you can climb into the cab and look around. But mainly for safety, please stay off the top of a train unless you're an authorized member of personnel doing a prescribed job which requires you to be on there. The Pyle National turbo generator is an E2 type. You need a minimum of 120 pounds of steam pressure before you start operating it. Speed in RPMs when it's going is 3,600, puts out 32 volts, 750 watts of electricity. The generator, headlight, and all other lights, switches, and wiring would be inspected and tested before the locomotive went into the roundhouse. An inspection would be made again prior to leaving roundhouse on each trip to ascertain that all lights were burning properly. The inspection of the turbo generator would consist of cleaning and properly oiling it, testing for a voltage every trip, testing of speed at intervals of 1 week. The voltage and speed were to be maintained within the limits set by the manufacturers of this kind of turbo generator. It was tested for loose electrical connections, worn or sticking brushes, and for any loose, worn, or sticking mechanical parts. Also for any loose or leaky pipe connections or worn globe disc valves. The generator was to be kept properly bolted and level on the turbine platform on top of the boiler. The headlight and the backup light would be inspected at least twice a month. All the adjusting parts for focusing and locking the focusing device. Also, the condition of the reflector and all electrical connections inside of the headlight case. When a new headlight bulb was installed, it was also checked. This was done by focusing a headlight against a darkened roundhouse wall or at nighttime on a straight piece of track. Headlights should be focused so that the pickup distance will meet government requirements, which are 800 feet. Whenever the locomotive was running, the headlight had to be turned on.
Now, behind the cylinders, you have the crosshead guide, and there's an arrow there, this point, and an arrow in the back. These are timing marks. As the crosshead moves back, the front of it should be at the back arrow, and when it moves forward should be where my thumb is. This transmits the power as steam pushes the cylinder back and forth, transmits power from the piston rod to the main drive rod and then to the connecting rods, causing the wheels to go around.
But on the drivers, you've got counterweights. Here, here. What these are to counterbalance the weight of the connecting and drive rods. So that way the rolling's a little bit more even. Otherwise, if without it, there'd be a heavy thump as the rods circle. This is the air pump. Steam comes in from the cab into here. piston comes up and down. This is your air strainer here, where the air comes in. Then the air is pumped in through these lines into tanks on the sides of the locomotive. Number 9 would have 110 pounds of air pressure in the tanks and 90 in the train lines. These operate the brakes. Now this is a diagram of the air pump. It's a 9.5 inch Westinghouse. Basically what you've got here is your top head. It includes numbers 72, 3, 74, 75, 76, 83, 84, 85, 108, 109, and number 8 and number 110. 61 is your steam cylinder, complete. 62 is your centerpiece. Then you've got 63 is your air cylinder. 64 is the lower head. 65 is your steam piston and rod. 66 would be the air piston. Then you have a piston packing ring, piston rod nut, then there is a reversing valve plate, and reversing valve chamber bushing. Basically what happens is steam is admitted up here, moves the upper piston. This in turn moves the bottom piston. As this bottom piston moves up and down, as it moves up, it sucks in the air, and as it's sucking in, it's forcing it through pipes into the tanks. These are some of the different wrenches that they'd use on it.
And the Pile National turbo generator on the fireman's side, in the line of the air pump, there's a couple of duplex pump governors. These regulate the pressure when the air pump reaches a certain pressure for the tanks. It is shut off, and also a second one for the lines.
To release the brakes on number 9, you'd add more air pressure to the brake cylinders. To release the brakes, you'd bleed off pressure. So if you're traveling along and you had 90 pounds of air pressure in the line, the brakes would be off. To apply the brakes, you'd reduce the air pressure. This would cause the brakes to be applied and slow the engine down. Now, when stopping a locomotive, you want to try not to lock up the brakes against the wheels so that the wheels lock and slide. What happens when you do this, you create flat spots on the wheels, which is a condition that you don't want to have. Same as in starting the locomotive, you want to try not to slip the drivers. On each side of the locomotive, These devices here are the injectors. Now, this is on the fireman's side. This little pipe here is only on the fireman's side. This goes to the squirt hose that's in the cab. I'll explain a little bit about the operation of the injectors later. The tender of number 9 is what is known as a semi-cylindrical or whale-back tender. The front third of the tank holds approximately 1,575 gallons of number 6 or bunker C fuel oil, which is a very heavy oil. The back 2/3 of the tank holds 3,500 gallons of water. At the front of the tender, this tubular device is a water gauge to show the water level in the water tank. There's pipe here that would come underneath the running board back to the main supply line from the water tank. As this is filled, as the water level rises, there's a float with a little gauge that drops down. The farther down it drops, the fuller your tank. This box next to it would be filled with sand. This is for sanding the locomotive flues. Now, above the sand box, there's a handle here and over here. Those handles are for the water valve. You pull those out to open the water valve from the water tank, push them into close. Now, there would also be just this side of the fireman engineer side handle, there was a box that would sit out in a bracket above the sandbox here. This was for the crew's water. This is the water box for the crew that I mentioned a moment ago. You'd lift up the lid. Inside you have a canister for water, and the rest you'd put in ice. At the bottom of the box is a drain valve to allow the melted ice water to drain out, and a valve to let the crew members in the cab get a drink. On both sides of the tender, underneath the running board, 2 pieces of metal. These are re-railing frogs. What they do is lift these out, turn them, and you can roll the wheels up on here to get it back on the track. The front end of both trucks on the tender are equipped with what are known as safety chains. In case of a derailment, these keep the trucks from running off too far from the tender. On top of the tender of number 9, this pipe here would contain a oil measuring rod that the fireman could pull up, wipe down, stick back in, pull back up, and measure the level of oil in the tank. This is the oil fill hatch. The box is for storing your marker and classification lights. Behind that, you have the water hatch and the backup light for the locomotive. This is another shot of the front side of the water gauge for the tender. Always remember, especially if you're tall, duck your head.